Nintendo. A company at the forefront of modern entertainment and beloved by all. For decades, this tech giant has graced our homes with their delightful and innovative consoles and their unforgettable adventures.
Nintendo doesn't really see itself as a competitor to PlayStation or Xbox. All Nintendo is interested in is interesting innovation, experimentation, and making games that are fun.
Everyone remembers their very first Nintendo game. They shaped the childhood of many people. And for many, the face of their childhood is none other than the Goomba stomping, pipe riding, princess saving adventure, Super Mario Brothers. These fun-filled games have touched the hearts of people all over the world and never fail to draw in a crowd. Throughout decades of fun-filled memories on countless Nintendo consoles, Mario has ran, jumped, stomped, and smashed his way through the competition, and remains to this day as one of the most fondly remembered icons of gaming as a whole. Join us as we take a look back at the history of the Italian plumber that made Nintendo who they are today. Let's go! The 70s and early 80s were certainly a turbulent time for video games. The rad new arcades had become the talk of the town. Everyone, everywhere, all the time were playing in arcades, getting high scores, and having a blast.
At the time, arcade machines were hugely popular around the world. Atari had already been producing them for quite a while. Classics like Pong had been around for a little bit of time, but they were really starting to take off in Japan, in America, and in Europe.
This intensity wouldn't last, however. People began to lose interest. Thanks to an immense oversaturation caused by developers such as Atari pumping out mediocre games left, right, and center, the burgeoning gaming industry experienced what went on to become known as the video game crash.
In the early 80s, video gaming meant Atari. Atari had invented the video game industry from scratch 10 years earlier and was now dominant. Its Atari VCS console was, the biggest console around, with kind of about 15 million of them had been sold. And unfortunately, it had very little controls over quality, and it was starting to get a bit kind of greedy and was just milking things. So essentially people got to a point where there were so many games coming out, it was more than there were players to buy them. So the industry kind of collapsed. Atari missed its earnings targets, Wall Street freaked out, took all its money out of video games, and the whole industry kind of went down like a balloon that had just been deflated. So it kind of killed the industry overnight. I mean, in 1982, it was on top of the world. It was $1 billion company. By the summer of 1984, Atari had been broken up and was finished. And with it, everyone thought video games was finished too.
The industry was on the verge of collapse, with many considering video games a passing fad. But amidst the chaos, a small, unassuming Japanese toy company, Nintendo, was poised to seize this opportunity.
Nintendo is one of the world's biggest gaming companies. They're a Japanese company and they've actually been going for well over 100 years now. Nintendo started by making playing cards that were the Hanafuda cards, the flower cards, but they then moved on to also making Western playing cards as well. And those were really popular and sold really well across Japan, and eventually the world as well. They also had a deal with Disney that allowed them to make Disney playing cards. And from there, after their bunch of different experiments with different types of businesses, so after Nintendo had been going for quite a long time, they really started to branch out into the burgeoning gaming world. Nintendo decided that they would try and get in on this really expanding market as well. And when they did, they really worked on how they were going to make a game that would stand out.
As fortune would have it, arcade developer Minoru Arakawa presented a golden opportunity in the eyes of a certain renowned game developer.
Minoru Arakawa went to America. He founded Nintendo of America in New York. He was quite successful importing Nintendo's early video games into America, but then he took a huge bet. He imported 3,000 radar-scope video game cabinets, but the game was not a hit in America. He only sold about 1,000 of these, and he had 2,000 useless game cabinets left in his warehouse.
Enter Shigeru Miyamoto, a young and ambitious designer with a knack for creativity. Miyamoto was tasked with creating a game to save the struggling company's arcade division.
He developed a game inspired by Popeye and olive oil with Donkey Kong and the Princess Pauline. Donkey Kong introduced a narrative element which was completely new to video games at the time. The main character, Jumpman, had to go and rescue the princess from the giant gorilla, Donkey Kong.
Donkey Kong was probably Nintendo's first big hit, and it featured Mario, except he had a different name then. He was called Jumpman because he was, I think, the first video game character that could jump. The Donkey Kong game, the original Donkey Kong game, was all about jumping over barrels because you were trying to save Pauline, I believe her name was, from Donkey Kong, who had her captive on the top of a tower and was throwing barrels at you as you were trying to reach the top. And I think the design was such, like, it was like, if you see a barrel rolling towards you, what are you going to do? You're going to jump. So hence Jumpman. That was, again, simplicity of design.
Donkey Kong became a booming success and a household name, seemingly overnight. People of all ages around the world immediately latched on to this simple, yet quirky concept, and had interest in this Nintendo. Nintendo did, however, face some brief lawsuit risk with Donkey Kong from Universal. Some claimed the giant gorilla to be a blatant ripoff of their own ape kaiju, King Kong. Nintendo, however, were victorious, and similarities between the two have since been dispelled. The lawyer who saved Nintendo in this lawsuit, John Kirby, went on to become the namesake of everyone's favorite pink puffball a few years later. Yes, people were adoring this Donkey Kong game, but the hero, Jumpman, needed a better name, as well as a brother. Inspired by a notoriously disgruntled landlord in Nintendo's Seattle offices, the team dubbed him Mario, and a legend was born. Building on the success of Donkey Kong, Miyamoto introduced Mario Brothers in 1983. This arcade classic starred Mario as he tackled pesky creatures, crabs, turtles, and more in a series of underground levels. It was even the first appearance of Mario's younger brother in Player 2, Luigi. But midway through the 80s, Nintendo's true breakthrough came with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. The NES truly breathed new life into the game industry like never before, and leading the charge would be a game that would define a generation forever. On September 13th, 1985, came the release of Super Mario Bros. For the NES. If Donkey Kong was the pioneer of the platforming genre, then Super Mario Bros. Was the master. The gameplay saw Mario jumping around wacky worlds, stomping on zany creatures, going through pipes, punching blocks, and eating lots and lots of mushrooms. In order to save Princess Peach, known as Princess Toadstool at the time, from the clutches of the evil Bowser, known in Japan as King Koopa. Shigeru Miyamoto became an industry legend thanks to this game, and still gets his due recognition to this day.
Shigeru Miyamoto is probably one of the most important video game designers there's ever been. He is a producer, a creative director, a game developer, a game designer, and he created much of Nintendo's early output. So he created Mario, he created Donkey Kong, he created The Legend of Zelda. So his contribution to the games industry really can't be understated.
Super Mario Bros. Blew my mind. Shigeru's design on Super Mario Bros. Was genius. You could pick up the game without knowing anything about it, and you can work out how to play just from the first level. That kind of accessibility was revolutionary in video games, and hooked a lot more people in.
Nintendo became so popular around the world because of how initially simple, but how gorgeously complex and gorgeously well designed its games are. I mean, you look at things like, let's take Super Mario, the level 1-1 for example. I actually spoke years ago to Shigeru Miyamoto about how he went about creating this. In level 1-1, a player will encounter absolutely everything that they possibly need to understand how the game works. And so in subsequent levels, it's what they know, what the game can assume that they already know about it, is challenged. So the very first little bit that Mario runs along and he jumps up and he hits the box and the mushroom comes out, it's actually very hard for a player to avoid that mushroom because the game wants you to run into it and discover Mario can make himself bigger. And that's one core mechanic of the game right there that you've discovered without any tutorials, without being told. You've just found it out for yourself. And that's the beauty of a Nintendo game. There's just so many fascinating elements to early Nintendo design. I mean, Mario, right? Take for example Mario. Mario's got his blue overalls, he's got his red hat, he's got his mustache, he's got a big nose. All of those things that make Mario Mario were done just because it made him easier to animate. It was just cutting corners essentially. He had the blue and he was blue and red so that he would stand out on the background. For, number one, he had a hat so that they wouldn't have to animate any hair. He had a mustache so that you didn't have to see his mouth and he wouldn't have to talk or make sounds or do anything like that. Every little thing about that is just very clever design.
To say Super Mario Bros. Was a success would be an understatement. Its gameplay style of side-scrolling levels, jumping around, and carefully curated level design became a benchmark that pretty much every future game can trace its inspiration back to. Even 40 years after the original's release, Super Mario Bros. Remains in the top 10 best-selling games of all time. There may not be a person alive who doesn't know who Mario is. This game propelled Nintendo into the stratosphere, not only leading to the development of other beloved franchises such as The Legend of Zelda and Metroid, but also to sequels to the NES classic. First up came Super Mario Bros. 2. But here's a twist. The version released in the West wasn't the same game Japan received. The Japanese sequel, releasing in 1986, was deemed too difficult for international audiences. What the West got in 1988 was a reworked version of another game called Doki Doki Panic. Though a truly bizarre Mario experience by today's standards, many Mario series staples like Princess Peach's floating jump, Shy Guys, and Bob-ombs originated from this oddball. That same year, fans were blown away by Super Mario Bros. 3. Packed with secrets, fan-favorite power-ups like the Tanuki suit, and an epic world map, it showcased the full potential of the NES, becoming a cultural milestone. Mario wasn't just limited to video games, though. In the late 80s and early 90s, Nintendo ventured into other media. TV shows, toys, cereal. Anywhere you'd look, you'd see the Italian plumber.
Even back in the 80s, Nintendo branched out and had kind of some merchandising and the TV shows and things like that, and a terrible film.
Truly, the games and pop culture sensation was a marvel to behold. But what if there was some way to digest it on the go? Nintendo had an answer: the Game Boy, releasing in 1989. This little wonder gave consumers the ability to play games away from their TV screens. On buses, in parks, on flights, anywhere you can go.
The Game Boy was another invention of Gunpei. His idea, and this is something he did throughout his career, was to take older technology and repurpose it in new, interesting ways. So the Game Boy was, even for 1989, quite primitive. It was black and white, its rivals were in colour. It seemed quite retro even in 1989, but because it was a handheld and it was primitive, it could use less batteries, and that meant it was far more portable and reliable. So basically Nintendo beat much more advanced competition by having something that was much more practical. Game Boy appealed because in the late 80s there isn't portable games. The Game & Watch had kind of fizzled out in the early 80s, so the idea of portable games was quite new and fresh and exciting. And what the Game Boy had was battery life. This was the most important thing, because these machines ate through batteries. If you had colour at the time, your batteries would last a couple of hours, and batteries are expensive when you're having to buy them that often. So that was the big thing of the Game Boy's design. And then of course it had Nintendo's games. It had Super Mario Land, which was big, but Nintendo also got the rights to Tetris. And this was really the thing that broke out the Game Boy, because it was suddenly this kind of Russian game that had been kind of knocking around for a few years but never been massive, was suddenly like, this is perfect, it's the perfect time waster in your hand on a journey. The combination of that game and a portable game console like the Game Boy was perfect, and suddenly everyone wanted one.
Game Boy was super, super popular because, well, you could take it on the go with you, obviously. But, that would mean nothing if it didn't have some unbelievably good games to go along with it. You had Tetris, you had Pokemon. Suddenly, you weren't glued to your TV anymore. You could take games out and about with you wherever you went, and these were good games. I dread to think how many buses were missed because people were just honed in.
The Game Boy even managed to contain a few bite-sized Mario adventures for people to enjoy in the form of the Super Mario Land games.
Hiroshi wanted to package the Game Boy with Super Mario Land, the Super Mario Bros. Inspired game. Henk Rogers persuaded him otherwise. He said, if you want boys to buy your Game Boy, package it with Super Mario Land. If you want everyone to buy your Game Boy, package it with Tetris. And he did.
The Game Boy would continue to dominate the handheld gaming sphere for many years to come, and evolve over that time. In the meantime, Mario's face was everywhere, and Nintendo was only scratching the surface of what their games could do. Nintendo continued going from strength to strength until 1990. It was finally time to power up. And power up they did on November 21st with the launch of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. This console boasted a considerable visual, audio, and power upgrade from the original NES, added more buttons to the controller, and even more finely tuned games.
The Super Famicom, or the Super Nintendo, depending on where you were playing it, was Nintendo's next console after the NES. It had such a gorgeous design. I love the controller on that, like with the primary colors and everything. It just looks so good.
Alongside the launch of this next-gen console was the release of the flagship title for the system, Super Mario World. Before the release of this gem, Nintendo had toyed with the idea of having the mascot of the SNES be Captain Falcon, the main character of the F-Zero franchise. This was because the fast, muscular, and superhero aesthetic to Captain Falcon and the high-octane F-Zero game itself would go contrary to the notion developing at the time that Nintendo was just for kids, and to ensure the fad wouldn't die out. However, the company ultimately decided to stick their already popular mascot character as the face of Nintendo. And what a smart decision this was, as 2 years later, in 1992, came the original Super Mario Kart. Gamers all over the world were drawn into this crazy racer, which was in many ways just like the core series, simple and straightforward, yet intricately designed and insanely fun. Mario Kart spawned an entire sub-series of its own, and has arguably outperformed the main series itself. As if driving into a banana peel, people were instantly head over heels. However, Mario wasn't just steering karts. He was steering Nintendo into fierce competition. This competition came in the form of the Sega Genesis, known as the Sega Mega Drive in the UK, and their feisty, lightning-fast blue blur, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Sega came along with the Sega Mega Drive, called the Genesis in America. Sega really wanted to distinguish themselves by appealing to a more adult audience, and it worked. For a while in the 90s, Sega was so successful that they actually overtook Nintendo in terms of video game sales.
In the 90s, Nintendo were right at the top of their popularity. The Game Boy was out, the Nintendo Entertainment System was out, but Sega were also hot at their heels trying to really recapture some of that market. So while Nintendo had Mario, the friendly Italian plumber, Sega had Sonic the Hedgehog, a cool blue hedgehog. And the contrast was that Mario games were often kind of seen as more family friendly, more kind of cuddly in a way, and they were quite slow paced compared to Sonic, which really sold itself on speed. So the Sonic games really positioned themselves as quite edgy, and that really spoke to a lot of teenagers and kids at the time, which meant that Nintendo and Sega ended up kind of battling it out with their mascots for console supremacy.
The rivalry between the two mascots defined the early 90s. Sonic's speed and cool factor challenged Mario's family appeal. Sega wasn't the only challenger to Nintendo's throne, however.
And that partnership with Sony was fruitful, and so they wanted to keep working together. So Sony developed a CD-ROM peripheral for the Nintendo, but they negotiated a fantastic deal. So in 1991, at the Consumer Electronics Show, Sony very proudly announced that it was partnering with Nintendo to develop the Nintendo PlayStation. There were a couple of Nintendo PlayStation prototypes actually built, one of which was auctioned for hundreds of thousands of pounds. But Nintendo had other ideas. They were worried about Sony taking control of their console, so they had secretly agreed a deal with Philips to develop this CD-ROM accessory. And Nintendo actually announced that at the same show. This was a massive betrayal. Sony was really upset that Nintendo had gone behind their back and announced publicly that Nintendo were partnering with one of their main rivals. Sony was so upset that they decided to go off and develop the PlayStation by themselves.
The PlayStation was an instant success, seen as leaps and bounds more advanced than the comparatively primitive SNES, much to Nintendo's dismay. It was clear Mario needed to make a big leap. That leap came in 1996 with the Nintendo 64, the first major console to feature a thumbstick for precise 3D control. The N64 was underpowered compared to Sony's PlayStation, but it didn't matter. Nintendo revolutionized gaming with Super Mario 64, which redefined the platforming genre and became the gold standard for 3D games.
Here we go!
Its open sandbox worlds, intuitive controls, and revolutionary camera system created an immersive experience that left players saying, "Wahoo!"
The Nintendo 64 console had its own Mario game, and that was Mario 64, which was a personal favourite of mine. That came out when I was a kid, and it was incredible. The Nintendo 64 used these new 3D graphics that we hadn't really seen before, and Mario 64 was just a beautiful game. It was visually very beautiful, but it was also super well designed. You started off in a hub level of a castle, and you would transport yourself through portraits to all different worlds within the Mushroom Kingdom to try and save Princess Peach.
The N64 is fondly remembered for introducing the third dimension to Nintendo. Mario Kart got its first sequel in the form of Mario Kart 64, a key point in the franchise's development for sure. Other Mario offshoots got their start on the 64, such as Mario Party, Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, and even the hugely popular Super Smash Bros., a crossover fighter that pits Nintendo's greatest fighters against each other.
3, 2, 1, go!
But even with Mario leading the charge, the N64 couldn't keep up with Sony's PlayStation, which boasted superior third-party support and a massive library. Nintendo decided to level up again with the release of the Nintendo GameCube, which gave rise to many fan-favorite Mario titles, such as Super Mario Sunshine, Mario Kart Double Dash, and even gave his bro Luigi time in the spotlight with Luigi's Mansion, a spooky little launch title in which Luigi must go hunting for ghosts armed only with a super-powered vacuum cleaner. Although beloved by fans now, at the time people couldn't stay invested in the games, as only a year prior Sony had already released a juggernaut that dwarfed the competition. At the dawn of the new millennia, the PlayStation 2 was released, a next-gen console far more powerful than the original. This completely obliterated the competition, becoming the world's best-selling console of all time. And this time, it wasn't just Sony overshadowing Nintendo. Microsoft entered the fray with the Xbox. And although only a modest success compared to the behemoth Sony had unleashed, they persisted and evolved for years to come. Since this point, the gaming world has been a fierce battleground, with Xbox and Sony in an arms race to see who can make the greatest console there is. Even with what some would consider a threat to Nintendo's business, they not only survived, but thrived. And that was thanks to their many beloved franchises, with the most popular of all remaining Super Mario Bros.
Nintendo often brings up real feelings of nostalgia, especially for people in my generation. I think because those consoles that came out when we were kids were so exciting and such a thing to have and so new. I remember from my childhood being so excited to see Mario, to see Link in Zelda, and to play Mario Kart around other people's houses. I didn't even have a Nintendo 64, but I was so excited to go around to someone's house when they did have it, so I could play all the games on it. I think because it's tied into that feeling of childhood fun, it really just evokes a feeling of nostalgia in a lot of people, and especially people my age.
While consoles faced stiff competition, Nintendo continued to innovate in the handheld market.
After the Game Boy had been so successful, they released the Game Boy Color, which was kind of a step up. It was smaller, it allowed you to play games in colour, which was obviously really exciting. And then after that, they also released the Game Boy Advance. So they'd been kind of on the Game Boy model for quite a while, and they really knew what they were doing with handheld consoles. But the real big next step was the Nintendo DS.
The Nintendo DS, released in 2004, was a massive success, showcasing dual screens, a touchscreen, and 3D capabilities. Mario took full advantage of the DS's power with a port of Super Mario 64 that showed off 3D gameplay on a handheld, which was unprecedented at the time. Mario Kart DS further proved the DS's potential, offering a polished racing experience that quickly became a fan favorite. And of course, Mario returned to his roots with the very beloved new Super Mario Bros. This game both introduced the platformer to a whole new generation, but also reminded veteran gamers of what got them into the series to begin with.
When the Nintendo DS came out, it had two screens and kind of flipped. And this meant that you were able to use the bottom screen as kind of a touch screen, and the top screen could show something completely different. So you had the same kind of controls that you did on the Game Boy, but you were able to do a lot more. Game designers were able to make games that really utilised this new tech, and that was incredibly popular. A lot of shops sold out of the Nintendo DS when it first came out.
The DS would go on to dominate the handheld market for years to come and become the most successful portable console of the age. Its lasting impact would influence other developers to produce quality-of-life apps and small-scale games for smartphones years later. The dawn of mobile gaming was here. Even with Sony and Microsoft's involvement in this console war, Nintendo proved that they were above this and prioritized innovation and recognition rather than raw power. It was up to the Big N to revolutionize once again. One of the things that made the DS such a success was the accessibility to a broad age range of consumers, both young and old, casual and hardcore. They saw the value in their brand, not only for games, but for experiences. And so in 2006, they unveiled to the world their newest invention, the Wii, a home console with motion-controlled technology.
The Wii was really, I don't know if anyone expected it to be as successful as it was. The funny thing about the Wii was, it wasn't the franchises that Nintendo was known for that were the reason for its success. I think the real reason for the Wii success was things like Wii Sports. It was the games that your granny could play. The people that had no gaming knowledge or vocabulary whatsoever, they saw this really fun, silly thing, waggling the Wiimotes and stuff like that. Like, instantly, you don't have to have any gaming language at all to know how to play that. And so it opened up gaming to a whole new audience. The Wii had, it had installments of all of the franchises that you'd expect. So Super Mario, it had a Legend of Zelda, it had, a lot of really good first-party games. But yeah, the biggest ones were the ones that were, I guess, for a lot of gamers, probably felt more like tech demos.
If the Nintendo DS was popular, the Nintendo Wii was wildly popular at launch. I actually worked in a game shop around that time, and we were constantly sold out of Nintendo Wiis. They really managed to corner the market on family gaming, which is something Nintendo's always been good at, but they released a lot of titles that were aimed at the whole family and not just kids. So they had things like Wii Fit and Wii Sports, which had a really low barrier to entry, and adults were often a little bit more interested in than the classic Nintendo games. And I think that meant that a lot of families saw it as a real great investment and something that they could get for the kids, but which the adults would play as well.
Of course, it was only a matter of time before the man with the mustache would show his face on this brand new console. Mario's outings in this brand new console showed gamers how the Wii's motion control can influence gameplay to create experiences never before seen. Mario Kart Wii, for example, came with a peripheral steering wheel you could attach to the Wii remote in order to feel like you were driving an actual car.
On the Nintendo Wii, Nintendo released their most recent version of Mario Kart, which was a wildly popular franchise and just a really fun game to play. In it, you race different Mario characters and different Nintendo characters. And it's a racing game that everyone can play. Kids can play it, adults can play it. It's super fun. And the version on the Wii utilised the Nintendo Wii's new technology with motion control. So as well as using a regular controller, if you had one of those to add to your console, you could use the Wiimote both as a regular stick for driving, but you could also add a steering wheel around it, and it made it feel like you were actually driving one of the Mario Karts. The latest version of Mario also came out on the Nintendo Wii, and everyone was excited for that. That was Mario Galaxy, which was fantastic and kind of an extension of the previous games like Mario 64.
Mario's 3D outing of this generation? Super Mario Galaxy also made effective use of the console's capabilities. In this adventure, Bowser had kidnapped Peach yet again and taken her into space. Mario must launch his way through the stars and around tiny planets whilst interacting with the environment using the controller's pointer functionality.
Super Mario Galaxy took Mario into new worlds, literally. Played with perspective, played with what players were expecting from a Mario game.
There's so many great Mario games, but Super Mario Galaxy on the Wii was so inventive. Just the way the whole kind of world used gravity in different ways to make these kind of strange puzzle games was...
The Wii was the talk of the town, even during the reign of Sony's PS3 and Microsoft's Xbox 360.
Nintendo legacy, I think, is just making games that make people feel good. They make games that they're colorful and feel like a warm hug. It's funny because when you look on the surface of Nintendo's main franchises, Mario, Zelda, iteratively, you could say those games are the same every time, but they're not. Each one innovates in a really specific and interesting way.
But the Wii's massive success began to wane in the early 2010s. As players grew more discerning, Nintendo's focus on innovation over horsepower became a glaring weakness. The Wii couldn't compete with the likes of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in terms of graphics or third-party support. And whereas those consoles provided tight, focused gameplay experiences, the gimmick of waggling a remote came and went, with many people preferring to sit down and play something more convenient and less physical. This was something even successful Mario games like New Super Mario Bros. Wii and Super Mario Galaxy 2 couldn't fix. Their handheld market seemed as powerful as ever, though. And so that is where their next play was going to be. Nintendo tried to recapture the magic in 2011 with the 3DS, a handheld console that offered 3D visuals without the need for glasses. This was a considerable upgrade to the original DS, putting it toe-to-toe with Sony's PSP handheld. It featured titles like Super Mario 3D Land, which combined the classic feel of Mario's 2D adventures with the exploration of his 3D outings, and made effective use of the 3D graphics in order to create immersive environments. The 3DS proved successful, but Nintendo's struggles in the home console market persisted. In 2012, Nintendo launched the successor to the Wii, the Wii U. This was the Big N's first ever HD console and featured another innovation for the home console business, the gamepad. Rather than using a traditional controller, players instead used a big blocky tablet-like device with a touchscreen that could interact with the TV and offer gameplay rather similar to that of the DS before it. Unfortunately, the Wii U was plagued by poor marketing, a confusing name, and a bulky tablet-like controller that developers found too gimmicky.
The next console that Nintendo came up with was the Wii U, a much more powerful console with high-definition graphics, but that wasn't Nintendo's strategy. Nintendo couldn't compete with these other systems that had phenomenal graphics. On launch, the Wii U didn't have many games, including none of the games from Nintendo's major franchises. No Mario game, no Zelda game. Also the name, Wii U. People just thought it was an extension of the Wii. They didn't realize it was an entirely new beast. So people had no incentive to buy that console at the beginning. So the Wii U did not sell well. Satoru Iwata was very apologetic about the Wii U not selling well, but he learned his lessons.
The Wii U was horribly marketed, and it couldn't really get that lightning in a bottle effect that the Wii had.
Even Mario couldn't rescue this sinking ship. Titles like New Super Mario Bros. U and New Super Mario Bros. 2, releasing within the same year of each other, failed to excite fans, who were growing weary of the new series' formulaic gameplay. Competing against the more powerful PS4 and Xbox One, the Wii U was quickly overshadowed, becoming one of Nintendo's biggest commercial failures. This was enough to make Mario go, "Mamma mia!" Despite its struggles, the Wii U had bright spots. Super Mario 3D World took the inventive gameplay of 3D Land to new heights, offering 4-player co-op and a wealth of creative levels. Meanwhile, Mario Kart 8 became one of the console's standout hits, showcasing gorgeous visuals and refined racing mechanics in creative, gravity-shifting courses. And then there was Super Mario Maker, which turned players into level designers. Its success on platforms like YouTube and Twitch kept the game alive far beyond its release, sparking an explosion of creativity in the Mario fan community. The Wii U may have stumbled, but it also set the stage for Nintendo's next innovation. Time and again, Nintendo proved that their legacy wasn't built on power. It was built on creativity, charm, and a commitment to fun. Even in their missteps, Mario and Nintendo continued to innovate, reminding the world why they were gaming pioneers.
Nintendo doesn't really see itself as a competitor to PlayStation or Xbox. All Nintendo is interested in is interesting innovation, experimentation, and making games that are fun.
Yet again, the success of Nintendo's handhelds outshone the home consoles. This made the company think about what the best move is going forward. And then they were hit by a stroke of genius. Why not combine them together? By 2016, the Big N was ready to turn things around in a big way. In classic Nintendo fashion, they completely blindsided the gaming industry with a new innovation no one expected that they'd be secretly cooking up for years: the Nintendo Switch. A hybrid console that could seamlessly switch between being used as a handheld and being docked on the TV.
Nintendo is so known for innovating with their hardware, and the Switch was no different. All of the big console companies were coming out with innovations, but none of them were quite as different as the Switch felt. It felt like a bit of a natural progression from the Wii and the DS, but also completely new at the same time. So the thing about the Switch is it can both be a handheld console, or you can put the handheld screen into a dock that attaches to your TV and then use the controllers on the side, so it's like a home console and a handheld at the same time. And that came out with fantastic games at launch as well.
Nintendo was hurting from the relative commercial failure of the Wii U, but it was propped up by its handheld market. And when it came to developing the next console, the Nintendo Switch, they had this philosophy of lateral thinking with withered technology. They weren't trying to compete with the latest graphics technology and the most powerful machines. They were just trying to be different. The Switch was by no means graphically advanced systems. It wasn't that powerful, but it had that unique selling point of being handheld or on your TV, and that really helped to sell Switches.
The Switch is huge. I mean, it was such a success for Nintendo because it really Nintendo took everything that it had learned from the console market, from handheld, from all its handheld expertise, everything it had learned about, everything that it had learned from the Game Boy, from the DS, from the 3DS, from everything. And it was like, why don't we take both of these and make a console that literally does both. And that was just, I mean, it's just a master move.
Like the Wii U before it, this was something the world had never seen before, and it marked a bold new era for the company. However, unlike the Wii U, the console was considered very friendly to third-party developers, giving the console a level of support never before seen for Nintendo. The result? A console that became a massive success, cementing Nintendo's place in the modern gaming landscape and becoming the best-selling Nintendo console ever. Of course, the Switch didn't just have its gimmick to thank for its success. People wanted to see how the Mario Brothers would take the leap onto this new platform. Luckily, the Switch boasted a renowned library of games starring the mustachioed plumber. On April 27, 2017, Mario and friends raced onto the scene with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This was an enhanced release of the Wii U title after a few years prior, sporting new content and giving Switch owners console-level racing on the fly. Releasing at a perfect time early in the Switch's life, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was a massive success for the company early on and remains as the 5th best-selling video game ever. It even continued to get new content several years later, solidifying its longevity. 2017 also saw the latest in Mario's 3D adventures, Super Mario Odyssey. In this exciting new game, Bowser has kidnapped Princess Peach, again, and taken her around the world to prepare for a royal wedding? This game also showed a certain self-awareness from Nintendo's side, as they gave players the sprawling sandbox style of gameplay they'd been craving for years, since the franchise appeared to become too linear and predictable. Various other Mario games, such as Super Mario Maker 2, Bowser's Fury, and Super Mario Wonder would release, and each becoming an instant success on this booming console. The Switch stuck around for quite a while, remaining a success, even despite lagging behind technically speaking compared to Sony and Microsoft's newest consoles, all leading up to the next generation in 2025 with the Nintendo Switch 2. This time, Nintendo knew what worked. No more fancy controllers or weird off-putting gimmick. This was simply the hybrid console again, but more powerful. Video games weren't the only success story for the plumbers, however. Ever since the decline of the Wii U days, Nintendo had been looking down other avenues to expand their brands to places other than games. It was around this time that Shigeru Miyamoto had begun working with Universal Studios in order to create a Super Mario Bros. Themed section at their theme park. By 2021, after years of planning, Super Nintendo World opened its doors at Universal Studios Japan. This immersive theme park brought the Mushroom Kingdom to life, complete with rides, interactive elements, and of course, the colorful cast fans know and love. The success of the park was so great that expansions are underway in Hollywood, Orlando, and Singapore, allowing fans worldwide to step into the Mushroom Kingdom like never before. This expansion into the wider pop culture world continued in 2023, when Mario would partner up with Illumination, the creators of Minions, to take on Hollywood in a new way with the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Unlike the infamous 1993 live-action attempt, this animated adventure captured the heart and humor of the games, delighting audiences and becoming one of the highest-grossing animated films of all time.
It was really Satoru Iwata professionalized Nintendo's merchandising arm and expanded into other areas and created a Nintendo theme park in Japan, and there's now another one in America, and of course the Super Mario Bros. Film, which I'm very excited about.
Today, Mario is more than just a video game character. He's an icon who has spanned generations, a symbol of Nintendo's creativity and legacy. Whether he's racing, jumping. Mario continues to innovate and inspire, showing the world why he remains the face of gaming. From humble beginnings in arcades to leaping into the hearts of millions worldwide, Mario's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. He was there to save Nintendo during the turbulent days of the video game crash and helped define what gaming could be with countless groundbreaking titles. Over the decades, he's not only adapted to the ever-changing industry, but thrived, leading Nintendo through the highs of the Wii and Switch eras while weathering challenges like the Wii U's missteps. Mario's adventures have even transcended gaming, leaving an indelible mark on pop culture. He's become more than just a plumber. He's a symbol of joy, creativity, and resilience. Whether he's racing on rainbow roads, rescuing princesses, or reinventing platforming games, Mario has proven time and again that he's more than a mascot, he's a legend. No matter what changes are in store for the gaming world, one only needs to look to their heart and they'll hear, "It's a me, Mario."